Going live. Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are. I'm St. Patrick, and from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And it's always a treat to welcome our friend Carleen O'Connor back to the store, albeit virtually today. Today, we're going to be talking about her new book, Murder on an Irish Farm. And Carleen very kindly signed a batch of books for us in, looks like green ink. There you go. Yeah. And so I'll go ahead and put a link to the signed books on our web store, should you be interested in purchasing one. And also, if you have questions for Carleen, go ahead and put them in the comments field, and Barbara will summon me back on screen. And that's it. So Barbara, over to you.
You know, this is such a missed opportunity. If I had known that Patrick was going to call himself St. Patrick, I'd have had a snake. We'd have set a snake loose up in the studio so he could show us his magical powers. Yeah. But alas,
no saint.
I'm going to ask, is this the only day of the year he gets to call himself St. Patrick?
So far. So far, it is.
It's a first.
So just to show you we're in the spirit, I am wearing my bracelet from County Mayo that I actually bought at a beautiful monastery there. And Carleen has got a Guinness just to prove that she's in the spirit.
I won't
right?
be just
so I have Irish tea. She has a Guinness. So we're
got my little pins and my little mug.
And she's actually wearing a forest green shirt, but it looks black.
I know, and my mother's watching. Why don't you wear a decent green? I'm like, this is a decent green, but she's right. It doesn't show up in certain lights. So next year I will wear a decent green, Barbara.
Okay, well maybe next year you can actually come and see us, which would be.
Oh, I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
So this is the 8th book, Murder on an Irish Farm, in this wonderful, and I love this. It's not quite an oxymoron, cozy police procedural. Set in Ireland. But before we talk about it, I want to give a little shout out to a rare book that we have, and we only have a few left. But if you are at all interested in Irish storytelling or Irish authors, you probably have already heard of John Connolly, who's a bestseller and long-term fabulous author, whom I actually met in England with Joanne Harris when he rescued us from the rain, kind of like Sir Walter Raleigh, except instead of throwing a cloak over the water, he brought up his little car and drove us back to our hotel in Manchester. Anyway, John has compiled this marvelous book, which is called Shadow Voices, 300 Years of Irish Genre Fiction.
Wow. I'm going to have to get my own copy of that.
Well, it's a large book, and on the cover, here's what the contents are: thieves, vampires, murderers, lovers, specters, detectives, aliens, gangsters, monsters, fairies. He doesn't say leprechauns, but as you can see, he's really run the gamut, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful book to browse. So if you're at all interested in Irish fiction, and Ireland, I might tell you, is not only filled with writers, but extremely supportive of writers. They may not still have their no income tax for writers law in force, but they've encouraged writers. They have Irish festivals, literary festivals. There's a hotel in Listowel that if you go there to drink in the bar is, all the photographs of famous Irish authors. It's marvelous.
Yeah, many scribes in Ireland.
There really are. I mean, storytelling is a very important Celtic tradition. So in our March book news, for those of you who've been to poisonpen.com and click on book news, there is a big section in the March one of books suitable for St. Patrick's Day reading, which includes, in fact, Murder on an Irish Farm and Shadow Voices. So Carleen, what's your background? Why is it that you feel that you can write? And you also have a second series, don't you? Not just the Irish Village Mysteries, but you have 2 entries in a second Irish series.
Yeah, there are 2 books in the Home to Ireland series, and that started out as an exclusive for Barnes & Noble. But that actually, their exclusive cozies weren't picked back up, I think, across the board. So the other exciting news is I do have a brand new 3rd series starting, and set in County Kerry. Now, those won't be cozies, those will be darker Irish mysteries. And the first one's called No Strangers Here, and it will come out in October. So I'm definitely keeping very busy. And it came about, I had been writing for my publisher for about 10 years when I got a phone call and he asked, would I be interested in writing a murder mystery series for him set in England? And I was just honest. And I said, I would love to write a murder mystery series, but I don't have enough knowledge of England. I'd only been to London once for like 7 days. And then I kind of hesitated and I said, but I could set it in Ireland. I was living in New York City. All my friends were Irish. My boyfriend was Irish. He had taken me home and at that point, I'd spent about a month in Ireland. I'd fallen in love with his hometown of Kilmallock, which is a medieval walled town, just absolutely gorgeous. And it was just kind of an impulse that I said, but I could set it in Ireland. And then my editor said, great, I love it, let's do it. And then of course the terror took over. But all I had to do was relax and put myself back in that little village and draw upon all my Irish friends and everybody I'd met in that village. And it just kind of took off from there. It's hard sometimes to look back and remember all the pieces that led to it, but I can remember getting that phone call. And had I not been to Ireland at that point and fallen in love with the town, like I didn't even know people could fall in love with towns, I probably wouldn't have had the same confidence. But my great grandmother, came over from Ireland, and my mom, Irish mom and grandmother, and I think it's also just partly in the blood, And I know Irish people, especially on St. Patrick's Day, right? They hate when Americans say, "Oh, I'm Irish," and "Where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from Texas," right here. It's many separations before it. But I think there's also something to, stories being handed down, customs being handed down, and just having that love and that feel. And then of course I do have to supplement it with research, and I'm lucky to have a huge group of Irish friends, and I can call them up, I can say, ask them questions, and they're more than happy to help if there's anything I need help with.
That's so wonderful. I really think that's an inspirational story, even if she kind of got here by accident. But my larger question then is, having agreed to write something Irish rather than British, why did you elect to write a police procedural, which does, after all, require you to have some faint knowledge of police procedure in Ireland?
Yeah, and I was lucky enough when I decided to make Siobhan an official Garda to talk with an Irish guard. And the funny thing is he was very open on our conversation, but when I said, "Oh, would you like me to put your name into the acknowledgements?" He's like, "No," like, let's pretend this conversation never happened. So there was a learning curve to do that. But again, it was just kind of a happy accident. She's an amateur sleuth in the first 2 books in the series. And I don't read them as much anymore, but when you're a new author and books come out, you read like everything anybody says about you online, which I wouldn't recommend, by the way. But I would see a lot of people write, well, why is she so nosy? Why is Siobhan so nosy, butting into all these investigations? And I just thought, well, that's frustrating. How else is she going to solve murder mysteries if she's not a little bit nosy? But I kind of thought, well, you know what if I made her an official Garda? Then she, it's her job to be nosy, and maybe that would fly a little bit. And I didn't know if my editor was going to approve it, because cozy mysteries often have restrictions, right? You can't do this or that. And so I just gave it a try, and I said, I would like to make Siobhan an official member of An Garda Síochána. And he liked the idea. He said, I think that would be really good for her character and, kind of round out the series. And that has been helpful. So I think it's probably kind of a hybrid between an amateur sleuth and the police procedural mysteries. So a happy accident.
Well, yeah, I if you're writing in the cozy genre, you don't have to be as precise, let me say, as Michael Connelly, for example, writing about the LAPD. There's a lot of flexibility. I mean, actually, in many cozies, there's quite a lot of improbability. There are a whole lot of like bookseller and librarian, solving murders out there, and dog walkers and people who bake and whatever. And I mean, it's fine. It's fun. It's kind of a fantasy, though, in a way. I mean, I can certainly tell you that if if every time a murder came along in Scottsdale, which is extremely rare, but should we have one, and I put a sign on the door of the Poison Pen saying closed, off detecting, pretty soon the bookstore would evaporate. And one of the joys for readers of cozies is the setting, and particularly small towns, villages. They're not nearly as apt to be set in Manhattan, let's say, or Koreatown in Los Angeles or something. There's a lot of charm about the smaller community and the relationships among the people, the animals that may live there. Everybody kind of knows everybody else's business. They cook a lot, often
Absolutely.
together, they eat
Yeah.
a lot, whatever. And so I think that the standard that you might hold somebody writing an urban police procedural, or doesn't even have to be urban, but anyway, a darker police procedural would be higher.
Yeah.
So I think that Siobhan can do it. The other thing I think makes it plausible, if I remember this right, she's the eldest of what, 5?
She's actually, James is actually a year older, but she's got a total of 5 siblings, and in the first book, she cares for the youngest, but James in the opening is still recovering from being an alcoholic. So he's not quite the dependable brother. She's the dependable oldest sibling.
Right. So she's kind of used to managing things, investigating things, seeing what her siblings are up to, meting out punishment, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And here we go, because we are actually on an Irish farm, and that very brother James is the person who comes and interrupts the plans for the wedding that Siobhan and McDara have. And you created this wonderful fantasy wedding, and I just knew when I started reading it, I knew something was going to completely derail it. And I kept saying, let's not ruin the wedding. Let's not do that. Come on. And then you did.
Yeah, there was a very calculated reason for that, because I really wanted to take my time with their wedding. And as you know, mystery readers, they want the body to drop pretty fast. And I thought, if I really take the time I want to take that their wedding deserves, then it's just going to drag out so long. And then the mystery is going to be kind of anticlimactic. So despite, not wanting to myself, I did know I had to interrupt the wedding so that I could save the wedding until the end, and they could have their romantic moment. They could have their moment of exhaling in peace and not be worried about murderers running around. So I knew, and I kind of liked playing with the fact that, when you read the book, Siobhan has one reaction to, what they should do about the wedding, and then McDara steps in and has another. So it kind of fit in nicely with their personalities too.
It does fit in with their personalities. And, here again, the advantage of a small community is that you can disrupt a wedding, which should be extremely expensive and more difficult to do if you were paying, like thousands of dollars to rent the Plaza Hotel or something of the sort. You couldn't get away with it. But in the village, it's not that tragic, to have everybody rush off to the farm. What has happened at the farm?
Yes, at the farm. So that's another surprise, that McDara bought this piece of farmland as a wedding present to Siobhan. And you'll find that out in a few pages, so I'm not spoiling too much. But it's an old abandoned dairy barn that has a slurry pit. And Barbara, I don't know if I was not that familiar with slurry pits, but after doing much research, they're so dangerous. There's so many awful things that happen in slurry pits. Now, this one has been decommissioned for a long time, but it's filled with debris, and James was cleaning it out before the wedding because he's getting into fixing up old houses, and he's doing it for his sister for the wedding. And he finds a skeleton in the bottom of the slurry pit. And it looks as if he sees the tattered pieces of what looks to be a tux or some kind of suit. So this looks like somebody else that was on their way to a special event and somehow ended up in a slurry pit.
Slurry pits are really, actually farms are extremely dangerous. If you have watched any British mystery on television, Vera, for example, or whatever, you can find out that there are many things on a farm that can kill people. And there are also ways to dispose of bodies. Pigs, for example, are really useful if you want to dispose of a body. But a slurry pit is another, because you drown in it, and it dissolves things. And, there are some, it's really an interesting location if you want to get away with a murder. I mean, those of you who watch All Creatures Great and Small, the new TV version, it's been cleaned up quite a bit. But if you read the original James Herriot books, he didn't sanitize them all that much. But of course, they weren't visual. But it's pretty basic on a farm.
Yeah. There's a lot to watch out for.
Indeed. So there's the body, there's the slurry pit. And because both Siobhan and McDara are Garda, they feel like dealing with this is more important than, or not more important, but it's going to interrupt their wedding, and neither one of them is unhappy. So that's probably another good reason you made her a Garda, because she'd probably have a different reaction if she weren't and the wedding was interrupted.
Right. That wouldn't have interrupted it. But, once she hears that there's some things, she knew that her brother James wouldn't just burst into the church, covered in muck for no reason. So once she knows something unsettling is going on, she just wouldn't be able to concentrate on the wedding. So that's
now, in your earlier versions, earlier entries into this series, that was started with Murder in an Irish Village, this lovely village that Carlene fell in love with. Your second title is Murder at an Irish Wedding. So who got married then, and how is this a different wedding?
I know. So that was those were two characters that I brought in. It was one of McDara's friends. So McDara was the best man of the wedding, marrying kind of a socialite. So since we'd already done wedding, this would have been the perfect title for this book. And that's when I kind of came up with the idea that, well, he bought her a farmhouse, because I also want the characters to move and grow. I mean, series authors have to decide, like, do I keep my characters in place and they don't age and they don't change, or do I kind of move them along? And once I made the decision that Siobhan would be an official Garda, I had to actually skip 2 years between book 2 and book 3 because she had to go to Garda College, which takes 2 years. And so once I start that precedent of moving them and growing them, and the siblings are all growing up, they're all going to be adults soon. I wanted something new in their chapter too. And I wanted something to mark their chapter as a married couple. And I thought, well, I can't shove McDara up in that bistro, right? They were living above the bistro in town. I'm like, I can't just shove McDara in there with all of them. And so that's when I came up with the idea for the farm. And then, okay, let's call it Murder in an Irish Farm. So to be honest, sometimes that's the fun part of planning them, is going back and forth with my editor of like, okay, what Irish theme is next for the book? And I will often then kind of plot around whatever that setting is going to be.
So we've gone on with an Irish churchyard. I remember that one because it has a kind of creepy cover. Then we have an Irish pub. Well, I mean, you can hardly discount the pub.
That's right.
And then we have an Irish cottage. We have an Irish bookshop. And which was the one we talked about last time we talked to Carlene, and the Irish farm. And Irish Christmas is a little different. I mean, it's not a place, it's a celebration.
Yeah.
But was that a book? I think it came out in November, didn't it? So it really came out as a Christmas entry.
Yes, that was a Christmas entry, although I think it's one of my favorites. It was just a lot of fun. I was able to move that to West Cork, and it involves orchestra members and musicians, and I just had a lot of fun with that one. My sister was just asking me, oh, which one's your favorite? And I get that question a lot, but I always joke, well, it's whatever I'm working on currently, but it almost is like having kids, because it's like, I can't pick a favorite, and each one has a different resonation of why I really enjoyed writing the book. And then there was Cottage. After Pub, there was Murder in Irish Cottage, and that one was fun because I was able to bring in superstition and fairies and all that good stuff.
I remember visiting a village in Ireland. One of those people were still living there, but basically it was a village there where people still burned peat, for heat. And what I remember was how pervasive the aroma of the peat was. And I would, I could see that if you run out of particular locations, I mean, you could have the lock, you could have, the Irish castle, you could have the, whatever. That you could also write around other holidays, major Irish holidays, for example. Do the Irish really go out as all out for St. Patrick's Day as the Americans who want to do that do?
In some of the cities, I think they do. They're going to have big celebrations in Galway and in Dublin and Limerick, but they also kind of are, half shocked and half in horror about how much the Americans go out to celebrate it. I think there's definitely some pride there, and like, what, the city's dyeing the river green like they do in Chicago, or
Right.
nothing for me as a New Yorker beats the St. Patrick's Day parade. And an Irish friend of mine was sending me videos this morning of the parade that finally, got back on after the pandemic. And even though they had a rainy day, it looks like they had a really great crowd and a great day. And I think a lot of there were some jokes going around about how many Americans go over to Ireland to celebrate St. Patrick's Day and then drive all the real Irish people crazy with with their, shamrock costumes and everything. But I think it's probably a toss-up who celebrates it more, but they definitely celebrate it. And Kilmallock, which is the town that I based Kilbane on in the series, a friend of mine who lives there was sending me pictures of, her kids dressed up and the parade they were having. So they definitely celebrate. Yeah.
I think people just like to dress up. I mean, I'm interested that Halloween is spread around the world, as an opportunity. I mean, it used to be like the carnival in Venice or Mardi Gras in New Orleans, but now practically every chance anybody has to do, well, it's really cosplay. It's the kind of thing that goes on at like the San Diego, science fiction Comic-Con thing, where people just like to dress up. But I was also thinking, Ireland has such a great tradition of music and singing, that you could have, murder at the music festival, or you could have, murder at, well, they're cathedrals. You've done a church, but you'd have to go out of the village to do that, though, if you did a cathedral. But maybe they could, visit Limerick or, what is it? The Blarney, the Blarney Stone or something. Is that, I mean, Ireland's small. You can actually drive all over it, although the roads
You can.
you in terms of time. But it's perfectly possible to kind of like drive all around in a fairly short time. So presumably they could go out of the village, to visit like the Blarney Stone or whatever it is you wanted to do. But I think probably you have to keep it rooted in your village, even if they like make forays outside.
It wasn't until book 5 that my editor approved them going out of the village. And because I was eager to do it in like book 2, and I said that I made the exact same point. I'm like, you could drive all of Ireland, they could go here, they could go there. And he's like, whoa, I really want readers to get to know the town, get to like the town. Don't be so quick to take them somewhere else. And then it's also a little tricky because, Kilbane's a fictional town, but then if I'm going to West Cork as I did, or if I would take them to Dublin or something, then you're bringing in reality, which is easy to blend. But I saw his point, and readers really they do like the regulars, they do like being in Kilbane. But now that there's enough books out, I have a little bit more leeway to take them different places. And an Irish musician friend of mine said the same thing. He's like, the next one should be Murder in an Irish Trad Session, so the next one will actually be Murder in an Irish Bakery. That's the one I'm working on currently. And it's going to take place in an old flour mill. So I'm having lots of fun researching those. But eventually we will definitely do a trad session or something with musicians for sure.
I love it. Soda bread, one of my personal favorite things.
Oh, yeah.
There's some great Irish cooking. I mean, corned beef and cabbage. We're all sort of familiar with that. I mean, Ireland has a particularly large population in the United States, thanks to the famine. Because so many people in Ireland immigrated because they were starving with the potato famine, and wound up in Eastern Canada and the Eastern United States, Boston and New York in particular, but fanned out from there. I grew up in Chicago, which at one point when I was a child was the largest Polish city in the world. So, there's a long, right now in our immigration debates, I think we kind of forget that.
I did not know you grew up in Chicago. That's where I live now. I had no idea.
I grew up in Winnetka, right,
Okay.
north of Chicago. But if you were in the northern suburbs on Lake Michigan, you spent a lot of time in Chicago because there was great transportation. And there's a little train, the L, that we used to be able to, and you could get off it in Marshall Field's basement. So even when I was quite young, my parents would allow me to take the L. And the little North Shore, the Northwestern was the big train, you know, that took the men who at that point was mostly men, who worked in downtown in Chicago and the Loop and so forth, and they would ride it up and down to the suburbs. But this other little train, we could do that. So we used to wander all over Chicago when we were fairly young and take
Love
advantage of.
And given I'm in
of all of that.
California right now, my mom said that Santa Monica has a really large Irish population as well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, but learned it today. Shout out to
Wow.
my mom, Pat.
Well, I mean, one thing you can do, I mean, there, you know, I think, isn't it Cork that has, don't they have a glass blowing, or is it not Cork? What is the Wexford? There's a glass, you know, they're famous for glass blowing and all, but I mean, you could always have people wind up in the village that or either touring or decide to show up and show people how to blow glass or open a glass shop or, you know, look for an apprentice. One of the hardest things about so many of the old trades and crafts is that people don't want to learn them anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, to try to find youngsters who are willing to apprentice to a trade and learn how to do it is hard. So, I mean, the village could kind of be like a recruiting ground, you know, for somebody who comes in and wants to have maybe a scholarship to the Wexford glass. There are also fabulous gardens all over Ireland. I mean, it's so green and so wet. So if you're over in Eastern Ireland, south of Dublin, there are a couple of famous old homes and, you know, mansions with gorgeous gardens. So gardening could be another thing that you could do in the village.
It's funny you said that because my editor and I were bouncing back titles for the one that we settled on, bakery, for the next one, but Irish Garden was up in the running there. So I know definitely Murder in an Irish Garden will be a future one. So this is the
Yeah, I
problem,
know.
Robert. Once you get started, there's so many great places we can use. I don't think I'll ever be able to stop.
Well, that's really true. You know, Ireland's a very rich, very, very old country. And even though Queen Elizabeth sent a force there and, you know, took part of it for England, which is still going on, there's, you know, we haven't even talked about fishing.
Yeah.
When Rob and I traveled up the west coast of Ireland 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, I mean, one of the things that was a real joy was the local fish and chip shop. There's an incredible, I'm trying to remember what they're called, but there was in one of the towns, and it's unfortunately dying out, but there was an amazing carpet factory where women were trained to do these rugs. It was brought to Ireland by a Scot and very, very difficult, the looms and the whole trade. We took a tour of it, which was fascinating. They had carpets in Buckingham Palace, they had carpets in other places, but now with power looms, the whole thing is fading and there are like 4 old women in the village who actually know how to do this anymore. But there again, you know, there's a possibility of reviving some of the old crafts by coming to the village because if it's a village, you know, startups are a possibility, right?
Yes. Yeah, you just made me think of Murder in an Irish Chipper because they love the chipper. So I'm gonna have to tell my editor you gave me lots of ideas here.
Sorry, it's the editor in me. I just can't resist. I kind of miss it, you know. I mean, I love book selling and we're so busy that I don't have time, but I probably edited over 800 books before we sold Poison Pen Press. And I still think that way when I talk to authors. I can't help but go, you could do this.
I love it. Are you available for private consultations?
Absolutely. No, I love doing it. I read lots of manuscripts for authors. My theory is if I'm going to have to read it sometime, when I read it doesn't really matter all that much. So if I can fit it in, I do a lot of consulting, editing and so forth, because, you know, eventually it saves me work. I mean, sometimes it makes my workload way too heavy in a moment, but down the road it comes in. And I'm lucky I have such a good memory that even if I've read a manuscript months and months beforehand, I can still remember enough of it, you know, kind of bluff my way through a conversation like this, which is fun. So
Better at that.
what
Sometimes
else would
I
you
read
like to say about the book? I think there isn't a whole lot we can say at this point without spoiling the plot.
Yeah. Well, I
to-
can say that it involves falconry. So that was a lot of fun. And I've seen readers start to post on a blog that did the recipe from the book, which are chocolate eclairs. Readers started posting their pictures of, falcons on their arm from when they went to Ireland and went to some of these falconry centers and experienced that. So that things like that are always like a thrill for me to see people actually, having experienced that. And now that I've researched it, the next time I go to Ireland, I really would like to visit a falconry and have it sit on your arm. And so that was a lot of fun. That's a part of the mystery.
Well, let me direct you to Ashford Castle, which is my absolute favorite place to stay in Ireland. And Ashford Castle actually maintains a falconry, and you can sign up for falconry classes, and you can go down there and fly the birds, and has amazing gardens. It's on a lake. It's one of my favorites, actually owned by, if I remember right, the Guinness family for a while before it became a 5-star hotel. And my husband's favorite thing about it is over the door, this is their motto: excellence since 1228. And Rob said there's nowhere else he's ever been where you could actually say excellence since 1228. And they believe they even have their own little ferry that goes around Loch Corrib. So, if you're staying at the castle, you can fish in the river. You can walk up to the village, which has a great bookstore and a fabulous bakery. You can fish in the river, and then you can take the little ferry boat and tour around the lake. So it's a perfect spot. I recommend it to you.
Well, I am definitely going. There's no doubt. It's already right here, Ashford Castle. That's
Ashford Castle. It's way over in the west. It's not that far from Galway. And
okay.
There's that whole what do they call it? The Wild Atlantic Way.
Yes.
Which is an opportunity to travel up the west coast of Ireland, and Galway's kind of a pivot for it, but it's a hiker, biker, whatever kind of thing you want to do, and really fabulous. Western Ireland is so incredibly scenic. It's a lot different, isn't it, than Eastern Ireland? Even though it's a fairly small island, it's remarkable how different the geology is.
It is. My father and I in 2019 went to Galway, and neither of us were driving there, and we were making our way up to Clifton, so we took a bus from Galway to Clifton. And I was so amazed how these bus drivers could maneuver this huge bus on these tiny curving roads along the whole Wild Atlantic Way. I was just kind of in awe. You forget to be afraid. I they're confident as can be. So it really actually was a really easy way to travel. I know that driving's probably a little bit more ideal, but neither of us, were that comfortable driving over there. So we could just relax and look out the window, and it's so beautiful. And it is a different topography, and, except for maybe, Kinsale on the other side there has a little bit of the feel to me as the west part of Ireland. But the new darker series will be set in Dingle. And I love being, kind of in that atmosphere as well, just there on the Atlantic Ocean, and you just can't beat it.
Oh, the Dingle Peninsula is truly wonderful. And the food is one of the great things that I've noticed about Ireland the first time we went, is they have a large oyster farming industry going on. And you can have the most astonishing oysters in Ireland, because you tend to think of oysters more as like France, but
Yeah.
Ireland, in fact, has a superb oyster industry.
I bet my sister just perked up in the other room because she's mad about oysters. We always, whenever we're together having oysters, it's like a race. We have to order so many so that, we both get our fill. So you're putting so many things on my next Irish list there.
Right. It's an incredibly diverse, for a relatively small place, it is incredibly diverse. I mean, in a sense, it's almost like California in that sense. California can be a whole country because there are so many different climates, landscapes, cultures, whatever it all is. And Ireland is very similar to that. So Patrick, why don't we call you up, St. Patrick, without
St.
the snake?
Patrick.
Come join us and see if you have questions or comments. You've traveled in Ireland. What do you remember
Yeah.
best?
Oh man, we kind of went around the entire edge of the place, up to the north, and I don't know. And there's so many. It's funny. We were there in 1999, and I gather that even in that time, the last 23 years, a lot has changed. I remember the wonderful soda bread, fresh soda bread in the morning. Not a whole lot of health consciousness going on there. You know, it was all thick cream and bacon, and it was pretty amazing. And almost lost my keyword. And it's funny because
Sorry.
I was just going to say, and you know, drinking is not just an accepted part of your day; it's an expected part of your day. So I remember that, and the pubs as kind of the center in these small towns of kids running all over the place and traditional music. I like the West Coast the best, I think,
Me too.
especially up north, like Donegal. When we got up there, that was really incredible. Saw a lot of great traditional music. But I love Doolin, Galway. Have you been out to the Blaskets?
No, but now that I'm setting in one in Dingle, that's on the list. And it's funny you say Donegal. I've been wanting to go to Donegal forever. And actually the character, I had a guy I dated for a while, McDara O'Sullivan. So that's where I gave Siobhan the last name and McDara the first name, and he's from Donegal. So I know all about it just through his experiences, and that's on my list for sure. Have you been to the Blasket Islands though?
No, I haven't. Have you, Barbara?
Barbara?
I have a fabulous photograph, which I didn't bring in, but I should have, because the Blaskets are, and it's a photograph of sheep almost marching straight up in the air. I mean, you can't imagine that gravity isn't going to take them over. And we haven't even mentioned weaving in Ireland and Irish tweed. And when we were in Galway, my husband disappeared. And I thought, where'd he go? And it turned out that he spotted this men's tailor shop. And the next thing I knew, he came back with a tweed jacket. He just couldn't resist it. So, that's yet another industry that you can do in a small village. You can bring real weaving back.
I did get to go to the Aran Islands, speaking of Galway, once when I was there. And the funny thing is that I'll remember as I was kind of on the cliff, and there was like one lone cow in the middle of this beautiful field and the ocean. And the tour guide was telling us how back in the day, there'd be one Garda for all three islands. So if the Garda was on one island, the other two islands were misbehaving because they knew it would take too long for the Garda to fly over. And I just stood there thinking, what a perfect setting for a murder mystery. And then my next thought was, some Irish writers should do that. And there are plenty doing that. But it just makes me laugh now, thinking back and thinking that, it never even occurred to me that I should write mysteries set in Ireland. So it's kind of a fun tie-in memory there.
I do have a good question from one of our Facebook viewers. Let's see, Tony, who's our friend from Romania. He's been tuning in lately. Hey, Tony. He says, let's see, I almost lost it. He says, I read both of the Home to Ireland mystery books and all 8 Irish Village books.
Oh, thank you, Tony.
He says, I love your characters. Sorry, this keeps moving on me. I love your characters and dialogue, and Garda O'Sullivan is a super character. Is she based upon a real person? And then he also says, I love Bartholomew Gill, and you remind me of him a lot. We love him too. Who are your favorite authors?
We really miss him, and he had the most bizarre ending. Do you remember how he died, Patrick? It was so weird. He fell off of a roof, I think, from what I know. It was out a window. And for a while, they thought he committed suicide, but then they decided that he was actually working out, or they think it's possible that he was working out some kind of a method for murder or whatever it is, and inadvertently ended up killing himself. But I thought the Megar. Wow.
Sorry, that image is in my head now. Siobhan Sullivan is not based on one particular person, but I think as a writer with all my characters, they just like a little bit of a lot of different people until you start writing them, and then they start to talk to you and become their own person and start to just then take off on their own. But including myself, I threw a little bit of everybody into her in the beginning just so I could get the feel of her, and then we were off to the races. I had a
You know, I
friendship
should ask-
on and stuff like that.
Sorry, I was going to ask Tony if Tony's still listening. If he lives in the Capitol, there's one of the most beautiful bookshops I have ever been in, which is converted from a bank into this glorious bookshop. And I remember that's the thing I remember most vividly about my time in Romania. So I hope, Tony, that if you're reading all these books, that's where you're buying them.
He had also asked, who are your favorite authors and influences?
Oh, we would be here all day. I'm a big reader. So currently I'm reading The Paradox Hotel by Rob Hart and Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett. Lately I've been on a mad streak of reading a lot of psychological thrillers. I read mysteries, I read literature fiction. I'd have to go genre by genre and start listing them all. I really like Colin McCann for Irish writers, and Paul Murray, and Catherine Howard, who is writing some great psychological thrillers. She had a good one during the pandemic. Was that called 52 Days? Was that?
Yes.
Yeah.
We talked to her about it. I thought it was a book that could only work in the pandemic, because to make it work, you had to be locked up with a person,
Yes.
under a stay-at-home rule. I think she's brilliant.
Yeah, I do too. So I'm just reading all the time. I always have, I like real books and I love watching them on bookshelves, seeing them on bookshelves, but I also, my Kindle is always full with a couple going at the same time.
Missy just came in with a question. She says, what did Carlene do prior to writing?
That is my sister, by the way.
Oh,
I think that is my sister, Missy, and this is her beautiful yard that she let me look out on. I was an actress and a sign language interpreter prior to writing. And while writing a lot of my books, I was working as a sign language interpreter, and I would just write in between assignments or on my way to assignments. It was kind of a job where I could create my own hours. So I was able to write and work at the same time for about 15 years.
there's an untapped market for a protagonist in a mystery series.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I did have a deaf character in one of my Mary Carter novels, which weren't murder mysteries. They were more women's fiction, contemporary novels.
That'd be cool. Amateur sleuth who was a sign language interpreter.
But actually, sign language is, each country has their own sign language. So I'm very familiar with ASL, American Sign Language, and I've thought about having a deaf character in the Irish Mysteries, but then I have a whole learning curve to learn about Irish Sign Language, which I don't have the same knowledge base of. But it's something I've thought about a little bit. If I ever meet someone in Ireland who knows Irish Sign Language, have a chat with them about it.
You could write off some more research trips.
Exactly.
Let's see, anybody else? Oh yeah, Tony says he's in Bucharest, and yes, he knows what you're talking about.
It's a pilgrimage site. It actually is, Tony. I mean, when we were in Bucharest, almost the first thing they told us was, to make our way, I can't remember the name of it, to make our way to this extraordinary bookshop, and I have photographs of it. But the bank converted. Remember, Patrick, I showed them to you.
Yeah.
The bank converted to his galleries, and all the way up at the top, if you rise up, there's a little restaurant and so forth up there, but it's a really extraordinary, there's also a brilliant museum in Bucharest.
Wow.
Which I spent quite a lot of time in. And in fact, Rory King was working on her book about Marie, the Queen of Romania. And there were some things in the museum that applied to her book. So I loved Romania. I can't wait to go back.
Is there a coffee shop book or coffee table book about all the bookstores from all over the world? That would be cool.
There was something, we carried it at the store. Do you remember, Patrick? It was
I
like
do.
90 bookstores to, I can't remember the exact title.
There've
But
been
yeah,
a couple
there
of
have
them.
been a couple. And every once in a while, somebody will do an article somewhere about, 10 bookstores you must visit, or the 10 most beautiful bookstores. And it's really interesting to see what they are and how whatever the building, is that houses the bookstore tends to determine. The last bookstore in Los Angeles, for example, has this amazing arch of,
Right.
you've been there, Patrick?
No, I've seen pictures of it though.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. And I don't know, I mean, I have no idea how it came about, whether there was a feature in the building where they could adapt it to the archway of books or so forth. But something like the Bucharest Bank, which just lent itself, to being an amazing bookstore. And somewhere in Palo Alto, they converted like a movie theater to, I think, a Barnes and Noble, which was absolutely gorgeous. So we had to do our own. Unfortunately, Scottsdale has a serious lack of historic buildings. So we haven't been able to find one, and we had to create something that was
Our
kind of
building's,
interesting.
our building's pretty cool though, as far
Well,
as.
it is, but it's not historic.
Yeah,
So,
getting there.
no, it is. That's true. I mean, we've been in it now for, let's see, since
23
1999.
years.
So
Oh, by the way, Carlene, Missy says, no, I'm from Iowa.
Yeah, that's her.
It is her?
That is my sister. She's not from Iowa.
I love it. Well, it's been wonderful to visit with you, Carlene, and I'm so glad to see that you are continuing with this. But I'm very excited about your foray into the Dingle Peninsula and something else. Because as you write, different series about Ireland, there's so many different things you can do. And a darker one will give you a chance to write differently than if you're writing the cozy police procedure.
I do like that I'm going to be able to balance writing a darker one and writing a lighter one. And just in case this is a different Missy from Iowa, I do apologize because that's my sister's name too, although I'm listening for laughing to see if I still think it's my sister, but if it's not Missy from Iowa, I do apologize. And it's nice
Schwebach,
to be with you too.
Missy Schwebach.
Oh, it is a different Missy. I'm sorry. And I know her. She and I have communicated. I'm so sorry. That's hilarious. That's my sister's name, and she likes to make jokes. So I just thought that was her because they're listening like a few feet away from me. That's
So
great.
we can see that Siobhan is probably based on real life. Real life is Carlene,
Right?
AKA Mary, has actually experienced it.
Yeah.
So I keep stumbling over Carlene because to me she's Mary, and I have to remember that for readers she's Carlene. In
I'm
any
Mary
case,
Patricia too, so maybe I could be Saint Patricia.
you could. Oh yeah. Well, we'll have to do a whole thing with the snake, you and Patrick, when you come visit. Anyway, we do still have some autographed copies of Murder on an Irish Farm. It's a lot of fun to read. The whole series is delightful, and we always feature it every March because that's a great time to bring together so much in the way of Irish authors. So thank you for joining us. I love the garden background. It's really, really beautiful. Have a wonderful St. Patrick's Day, everybody. And I don't have a Guinness, but be sure that you grab a suitable beverage and salute it for the rest of the